Hey, fifth graders. So today we're going to continue with our place value, thinking in our decimals. So I wanted to go over this place value chart with you. Yes, we kind of went over this yesterday, but I think this gives us a better visual of what we're really working with here. So we know that when we're working in our ones place, every time we go to the left, it gets 10 times larger. So this is when we're going in whole numbers. Our ones to get to our tens place, we multiply by 10. Tens to 100, we multiply by 10 again, etc. Because our numbers are getting 10 times larger. Well, now what changes with our decimals is every time we're going to the right, it gets 10 times smaller. So basically we're dividing it by 10, we're splitting it. So when we're thinking about our place value going to the left, you have $1, you multiply it by 10, now you have $10, $100, $1,000. But as we're going the opposite way, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We said this can get a little tricky because we don't really have coins that go past a penny. We said it's like a tenth of a penny, right? So after your decimal, we have our tenths place, which is divided by 10. It's 1/10 of a whole, as we have here. And then we go to our hundredths place, which is now 1/10 of a tenth, or 1/10 of a dime would be a penny because it takes 10 pennies to make a dime. We go over one more place and it gets 10 times smaller again. This is where we said we have a tenth of a penny and the thousandths. The one thing we said yesterday, the big difference here, is there are no ones when we go into our decimal place value. We have to go into our tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Those stay the same. You'll notice the ones, the orange column here, is what's different, but we don't have that in our decimal place. But other than that, it looks pretty much the same. The only thing you notice is this TH. Anything after the decimal to the right of the decimal smaller than a whole is a tenths, hundredths, thousandths. It's kind of tricky to say, but that way you know for sure it's in the decimals and not in the whole numbers. So if you want to pause this video and maybe write a chart fairly similar to this in your notebook, I know we did it yesterday, but I think this is a pretty clear way to do it. I'll also post it into Google Classroom for you guys so you can come back to it. But just knowing that our tenths are 1 place value over, our hundredths are 2 place values over, and our thousands are 3 place values over. Just like they are to the left of the decimal, only we're going the opposite direction. And just like we can do with expanded form, word form, like we can do with whole numbers, we can actually do this with decimals too. Doesn't change, it's just the way it's written is going to look a little bit different in expanded form. So our standard form is always just like I like to call the regular way. This is just with the numbers. In this case, you'll see numbers and decimals. We're used to seeing standard form as really big numbers, maybe like 1,789,052. Today, you will see some large numbers and you will see some decimal numbers. So they're going to kind of mix it up on you just to kind of remember back what we've done in the past and what we're doing now. So standard form is kind of your regular way. Your word form, again, is how you would read this number and then write it out in words. So think about it. If someone said, "What is this number?" you would say, "Well, it's 35 and 26 thousandths." That's exactly how you'd write it out in word form. Again, they mean the same thing, only standard form is working with numbers and word form is working with words, just like it says. Expanded form. Continuing on, this is where we break everything into the place value. So this is going to look very similar as expanded form as we've seen before. The only difference you're going to notice here are our decimal points here. It's very, very important we have the right amount of zeros. So pulling this apart, you still need to recognize place value. Because if you remember, extra zeros or not enough zeros changes our place value. If we didn't have a 0 here, this would go from 2 hundredths to 2 tenths, and our whole number would get mixed up. Or if we didn't have these two zeros here, all of a sudden our 6,000ths could become 6/10. And those are very different numbers. That's 100 times smaller than what it would be as if you wrote it without zeros. So we have to be very, very careful. So one way I like to do this is I like to take my number and underline where I'm working. So 30 and 5 right here, that should be fairly straightforward. We've done that a bunch. But now my 200ths. I know this is my 10ths place. I know this is my 100ths place. And I know this is my 1,000ths place. So my 200ths, I have to be very careful that I leave a 0 in the 10ths place because I don't have any 10ths in this one. So I have to make sure I put that 0 down here. So that way I know my 2 stays in the 100ths place and I have no 10ths. My 6 is in the 1,000ths place. If I look here, I have 1 place value, 2 place values before that 6. I can come down here and replace those place values with zeros. So now I can say, okay, I have no 10ths, no 100ths, but I do have 6,000ths. And again, when it says 26,000ths, we were talking about yesterday how you read it. That is where your last number falls. So I have 26,000ths. My last number needs to be in my 1,000ths place. The one thing I think gets a little bit trickier today is how we write it in expanded form with powers of 10. This might look a little funky, but do not let the parentheses fool you. It's really no different. It's just kind of splitting it up into separate equations. So you're splitting it up into every place value. We have a number in the tens, a number in the ones, tenths, nothing, hundredths, yes, thousands. So looking at our first number here, so I'm just going to go back to our expanded form. I'm going to actually change colors of pens. I'm going to change it to purple. All right, so now if we go back to our expanded form up here, we know we're starting with 30. Well, if we're breaking everything into powers of 10, I know that 3 times 10 is 30. And now I go back here, I have a 30, and then I have a 5. Powers of 10, it's in the ones place, so it's just going to be 5 times 1. Now, we decided when we looked at our original number, we don't have any tenths, so we don't have to write anything. You don't have to say 0 times 1/10, because it would still give you 0. So you can just skip over anywhere that there are zeros when you go into expanded form. Now I know I said right here I have 200ths. So if I was to write this as a fraction, it'd be 1/100th is how I would use that place value. And I have 2 of those. I have 2 hundredths. And then my last one here is 6,000ths. 6 times 1/1000th. So all you're doing for this powers of 10 is you're just breaking these numbers up into their place value from the expanded form. You're multiplying them by their place value. 30 is 3 times 10, 5 is 5 times 1, 2 is 1 times 100th, 6 is 1 times 1,000th. So I'll do one more with you guys really quick. And you'll notice there are a few numbers in here, 12,402. It's the same thing, that's what we've already done before. We're just gonna split everything into place value. So I wanna look at number 3 because we get into some decimals on number 3 here. So make sure you're writing all this in your notebook so you have something to come back to. And if you needed what we were just working on, if you were watching and you forgot to write it down, you can scroll back and pause it and write everything down for yourself. So in this case, they gave us the expanded form. We need to split it up now. And we'll put it back together and then split it back up, I guess. So we have 70 plus 2 plus 4/10 plus 3/100. Well, standard form, I know, is just my numbers all put together as a normal number. So I know 70 plus 2 gives me 72. And then I need my decimal, because after my ones comes my decimal. I have 4/10 and 3/100. Well, I notice my 4/10 here is right next to my decimal, so I can put it here. And then my 3/100 comes right after my 4/10. So if I'm actually going to go to word form next, because I think that's the next step that makes the most sense, we had, if we were to read this out, We have 72. And remember, we always read our decimals, and 43 hundredths. The reason it's 43 hundredths is because my last place value here is the hundredths. I'm not going to say and 4/10 and 3/100. Well, I know 4/10 and 3/100 together is 43 hundredths, just like you would read it with regular place value. Now my last one here is my expanded form with my powers of 10. This is where my parentheses come in. So if I'm going to look at my 70 up here, I know that my 70 is 7 times 10. It's in the tens place, so I need to make sure I use that in here. I include my place value right here. And then I know it's 7 groups of 10, or 70. Plus 2. Well, 2 is in the ones place, so it's just 2 times 1. And then I know that next I have 4/10. It's right next to the decimal, the first place next to the decimal. I know that's the 10ths place. So I have 4 times 1/10 because it's in the 10ths place. And then my last one here is in the hundredths place. It's the next one right over here. Tenths, hundredths. And I have 3 hundredths. So I know that I have 3 times 1/100th. And if this feels a little bit confusing today, don't panic. This is just day one, and we're going to continue to work on it. But what I do want you to keep in mind today is that as we're splitting these up, those zeros do hold a place value. So if I have extra zeros that I add or I get rid of, it's going to turn my tenths into hundredths or my hundredths into thousandths. And so today, keep in mind, I will post the place value chart. Keep in mind where your decimal is falling. Is it the tenths, hundredths, or thousandths? And know that every place value to the left, like we've always done, is 10 times bigger. And every place value to the right is 10 times smaller. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths, same exact idea applies for both. If we're going to the left, we multiply by the whole value, so by 10 or 1. And then if we're multiplying it to make a decimal, you're just multiplying it by a fraction. So keep that in mind as you're going through your assignment today.